Inner guidance. My own first experience of PB came in 1977 while he was visiting my teacher, Anthony Damiani, in upstate New York. Anthony had been devoted to PB since the mid-40s and drew a great deal of inspiration from him, even though PB was adamant about not being anybody's guru. PB consistently presented himself as simply a writer and researcher with some experience in these matters. That is all. But Anthony was well aware that PB invested the word researcher with a good deal more meaning than most hearers were likely to understand. In 1971, Anthony had founded Wisdom's Goldenrod Center for Philosophic Studies in Valois, New York. He liked to have pictures of saints and sages from various traditions on the walls, and he rotated them regularly. When PB first visited the place and he saw his own picture on the mantle over the fireplace in the meditation room, he took it down immediately. He told us that displaying his photograph was inappropriate and recommended that those of us who needed that kind of inspiration should use a photograph of Ramana Maharshi instead. PB stayed in the area for more than a month and had at least one private interview with each of Anthony's students. He never addressed us as a group, and to my knowledge, did not address groups in his later years. His work other than writing was solely with individuals, and he made it clear that he had no interest in having disciples. In my first interview with him, I asked about how to cultivate and recognize inner guidance. He said there are 2 steps. First, you have to be able to make yourself completely humble. If you can't do that, then it's a moot point. There won't be any guidance. He paused long enough for me to realize that the humility he meant went much deeper than I understood. If you can't do that, then you need to be able to do nothing. And doing nothing isn't the same as not doing anything. It's active, inwardly attentive. You can go about your normal affairs, but you refrain from any decision or action on the specific issue about which you're seeking guidance. There's no telling how long you'll have to wait, but if you do it right, then when the guidance comes, there will be no doubt about it. It will be vividly clear, and the strength needed to follow it will also be there. In the same interview, he asked me, what particular shade or aspect of the word truth is most meaningful to you? By that time, nearly 29, I had pretty much decided that the word truth wasn't a meaningful one for me. I could relate to the idea of honesty, based on reflecting on one's own experience and deepest desires, but truth seemed too much to ask. I could demand honesty from myself and others, no more and no less. Everyone had and was entitled to their own opinion. While I certainly thought some opinions better than others, particularly my own at the time, I profoundly doubted the usefulness of the word truth. But as I sat across from PB, with that thought in my mind, it seemed absurdly false. The doubt lifted, and I heard myself say something that sounded much more than just honest. It sounded like it came from a core of me that knew what it was talking about. From that time on, I've had no doubt that the word does have appropriate content, and that understanding it is an essential part of being fully human. It was a simple question about a word others, including Anthony, had used many times. But in PB's presence, it took on a whole new dimension. Others who met him had similar experiences. I suspect that's part of the reason. As soon as PB left, Anthony put his photograph on the mantle of the meditation room. Sense knowledge. A few years later, just before Thanksgiving in 1980, Anthony asked me if I would go to Switzerland to help PB with some work. PB had deliberately not published anything since The Spiritual Crisis of Man in 1952, although he had been writing nearly every day. Now he was beginning to organize the work he had done in the intervening years, and Anthony wanted to offer him some help. In March of 1981, I arrived in La Tour des Piles, thinking I was there to function as a good editorial assistant. PB soon made it clear that the literary work, as he called his writing, had about the same status in his daily routine as a tidy and orderly apartment, clean dishes, and good preparation of the freshest possible food. Only after I was more or less up to speed on helping him on that side of things did we spend time working on his writings. For the first few weeks, I felt that I was not the best person for his actual day-to-day needs, and that probably was indeed the case. It took me a while to realize that the point was much more that he was the best for mine. I wasn't really aware of the extent to which part of me was reaching out to him through the early weeks for some sort of answer, some sort of ultimate insight that could be expressed in intellectual terms. As long as that was going on, things didn't go smoothly. One of the first breakthroughs came through food. He liked his fruit at the peak of ripeness. Most of what I served him was either too green or too ripe for his taste. So one day I approached him with a basket of fruit before serving any of it with lunch. "Do you know some way of telling if one of these is just right?" I asked. When he answered yes, I was so relieved. Now I could be sure of giving him only the ones he would actually enjoy. Then he said kindly and with a smile, "I have to bite it." I can't explain how, but in addition to being very funny, that remark brought the term sense knowledge to a whole new light. Going deeper. Later he told me that up through publishing the writing of The Wisdom of the Overself, which was published in 1943, he had been content to quote authority when he was not certain from his own experience about the truth of certain things. He had relied, of course, on his own judgment of whom to take as an authority, but from that time onward, he felt an increasing inner pressure to write only what he knew was true from direct first-hand experience, or what he termed inner research. That process gradually identified the gaps in his own development. What had he already written, for example, that he was not absolutely certain was true? Or what might be he writing on in a given day about would he even have the slightest remaining doubt? Many writers may have been content in such a circumstance to admit that there are some things they shouldn't write about. But in his case, it enabled him to focus and energize his efforts. His desire to know more fully and to help others by writing more precisely and more clearly came to its full strength. Part of what this meant was that at the peak of his literary career, he began withdrawing from the trappings of obligations and privileges of fame to focus on filling those gaps. To my mind, this is the point at which he began to become a man difficult to write about truthfully, and where his words began to become priceless. He was no longer interested in defending any doctrine, but only in what he could say with certainty. "No one can explain," he wrote in his notebooks, "what the overself is, for it is the origin, the mysterious source of the expanding mind, and beyond all its capacities. But what can be explained are the effects of standing consciously in its presence, the conditions under which it manifests, the ways in which it appears in human life and experience, the paths which lead to its realization." Nonetheless, because he considered it so fundamental to meaningful living, he wrote often about what he meant by the term overself. Here are a few of my favorites from the first volume of his posthumously published notebooks. "The point where man meets the infinite is the overself, where he, the finite, responds to what is absolute, ineffable, and inexhaustible being, where he reacts to that which transcends his own existence. This is the personal God he experiences and comes into relationship with. In this sense, his belief in such a God is justifiable. The overself is the point where the one mind is received into consciousness. It is the I freed from narrowness, thoughts, flesh, passion, and emotion, that is, from the personal ego. Because of the paradoxically dual nature which the overself possesses, it is very difficult to make clear the concept of the overself. Human beings are rooted in the ultimate mind through the overself, which therefore partakes on the one hand of a relationship with a vibratory world, and on the other of an existence which is above all relations. A difficulty is probably due to the vagueness or confusion about which standpoint it is to be regarded from. If it is thought of as the human soul, then the vibratory movement is connected with it. If it is thought of as transcending the very notion of humanity, and therefore in its undifferentiated character, the vibratory movement must disappear. It is a state of pure intelligence, but without the working of the intellectual and ideational process. Its product may be named intuition. There are no automatically conceived ideas present in it, no habitually followed ways of thinking. It is pure, clear stillness.